Welcome to the Just Settled podcast. I'm Dan Taft. With us today, I have an incredible personal injury attorney out of New York City, Justin Blitz, the founder of Blitz Law Group. Welcome to Just Settled, Justin.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's great to have you. So we can kind of dive right in. I wanted to talk to you about a specific case today. This was an interesting one. How did you you can introduce us to it. How did you first learn about this case, and what were your initial thoughts when this specific case came across your desk?
So, in my world, Dan, we get such fascinating, catastrophic cases that potential cases that come across my desk every day, and there's always a couple of them that will stand out just in terms of their horrific circumstances. One that I recently resolved. This was a 30-year-old. He was a father of two. He's from Queens, New York, and he went to a hospital. He had an asthma attack. Occasionally the asthma attacks would get severe enough where he would go get treatment at the local hospital, and that occurred this day. They needed to do a endotracheal intubation to get him breathing a little bit better, and which is a fairly I don't want to say simple, but it's a common procedure that's done in the hospitals. And what you do is you put the tube, you're supposed to put it through one's larynx and go down through the breathing. And in this case, the attending doctor put the tube for the intubation through his esophagus, and it caused it caused carbon dioxide to his brain to be deprived, and he suffered a horrible brain damage, and he passed away a couple days later. And it was a intense litigation from the very beginning.
Yeah, that's horrific. So that would be, is that, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that a medical malpractice suit technically, or?
Case. So I do all personal injury, catastrophic injury cases. I'm trained as a malpractice attorney. The majority of our cases are typically trucks and automobiles and horrific crashes. But we also I handle what's called premises liability. It's trips and falls and broken steps and broken sidewalks, and so if there's a horrific injury, that's what my law firm is trained to help on.
Right, and this certainly was obviously particularly horrific, the one you just described there. In that case, in terms of what you sort of anticipated the outcome to be when first came across your desk, were there any specific concerns or uncertainties in terms of how you saw it playing out, or did you kind of see this as a pretty clear-cut case when it was presented to you?
I've yet to find one of those, to be honest. It's absolutely amazing. I've been doing this for 20 years, and it's like there's no such thing. Um, Somebody trips and falls on the sidewalk. There's complications involved in all of them, and this one in particular was highly contentious. The the other defendant, besides the attending doctor, was when these intubations are done in the hospital, to confirm that it was done properly and the tube was inserted properly, they wheel over the portable chest X-ray machine, and they take a chest X-ray, and the radiologist then reads it to confirm. And in this case, when they did that, the radiologist read the film wrong and confirmed what in fact wasn't true, was that it was inserted properly. So the radiologist was named as a defendant in the case, and the hospital was named as a defendant in the case. And whenever you have multiple defendants, you have fingers pointing at it was this guy, not us. And that's what happened here, which resulted in um, over 5 years of litigation, uh, over uh, 12 depositions, 13 depositions, um, various motions, and many times these cases, it's like, it's hard to see that there's a finish line, but you keep fighting hard and trucking away, and eventually you do get there.
And in terms of that, I guess when the client's family, what in this type of case, what would it be a reasonable expectation in terms of restitution or like a monetary value? Obviously, you can never replace the loss of someone's life like this.
Well, it's a great question, and it's incredibly apropos for the moment. And the reason why I tell you that, so you're asking about the damages in a wrongful death case. And the damages in a wrongful death case, it varies by state. It is not, there's no such like federal sort of national standard. And in New York, the wrongful death law is actually horrific. It's the most antiquated. It was last changed over 100 years ago, and it's us and North Dakota, right? And that literally have these terrible wrongful death laws. And the reason why I say it's apropos is because just this past week, the New York State Assembly and then the Senate passed a bill to change the wrongful death laws. And it is actually, as we speak, sitting on the governor's desk for her signature. And we hope that she will sign it, because so in New York, you can recover for what's called conscious pain and suffering. In this case, when the gentleman had the intubation, he then immediately suffered brain loss, and there wasn't that much conscious pain and suffering. Um, just like if you were to like walk out of your office and get hit by a bus, there's not much conscious pain and suffering. And then you can recover for um, what economic loss. So if, for example, um, God forbid, I have um, an income, and I have children who rely on me financially. So under the law in New York, someone like myself, um, my life has a high value because there would be economic loss. Now, if you're in my case, he was a 30-year-old. He was a part-time worker. He was still in school, and he didn't have a lot of economic loss that you can attribute with respect to him. Just like if you're a teenager, for example, or if you're the elderly, the value of your life in the state is really not worth anything, unfortunately. So um, we recovered, um, in this case, a very, very excellent many millions of dollars um, for the family. He left behind he's now 6 year old boy who lost his father, and that's the long answer to your question, and the reason why I spend so much time on this is we hope that the wrongful death laws are changed in New York. It's something that I personally have been fighting for since I became an attorney. I've been going up to Albany and trying to convince the legislators that it's antiquated, and hopefully, the governor will do the right thing here.
Awesome. Well, thank you for laying that out. I didn't even know about that in terms of the laws sort of being uniquely antiquated. And I think you mentioned North Dakota was the only other state.
Yeah, it's incredible. Most people don't know until you're in the situation, unfortunately, when you've suffered a loss and then you have an attorney like me. Um, when I was 15 years old, I was in a terrible accident and my friend died. And I remember that was the first lesson of my life with respect to damages in New York, because even though, and what's amazing is you could say, and not just by the way of the parents, but like you can actually prove, well, he was going to be, he was going to go to Harvard, or he was going to be he would have been the best this chef ever, whatever. It's not what you could have been, or it's what they were doing at the time of the death. So that was my first lesson when I was younger. Most people don't know about it, and it is pretty, and including, by the way, the legislators when we go up, and they have no idea the extent.
That doesn't shock me for some reason, that they don't know. But that's great. That's amazing that you've been fighting for that. And, again, keep us posted. I hope that there is news about that in a positive way for
Yeah,
these
thank
folks.
you. I'm a board member of the New York State Trial Lawyers, which is the organization that fights for civil justice in our state, and they do amazing things. And so, with their efforts, we hope that this law will be changed. Yeah.
All right, well, I'll keep an eye on it. In terms of this case, just kind of circling back to the specifics here, you mentioned the finger pointing and sort of different departments, obviously, um, trying to, I guess, kick the can down the road, so to speak, and just not take accountability for it. Were those the primary obstacles and kind of opposition that you encountered, or were there any additional unique challenges about this case that kind of came up through the course of it?
The argument from the attending doctor and his attorneys was that the tube was actually inserted properly, and it was when he was in the gurney and being moved in the emergency room that he was bumped, and it caused it to be dislodged. And I knew that wasn't true. And I knew that there was somebody in the emergency room that day that also knew that that wasn't true. And that took a very long time to discover that person. Um, and we went through many depositions of various nurses. And finally, we found um, a nurse who not only was there that evening, but saw the doctor insert it improperly, knew it was done improperly, told the doctor she thought it was done improperly. He poo-pooed her and paid no mind to her. And then it was only when he started suffering horrific oxygen desaturation and carbon dioxide loss, and it took 58 minutes until the doctor realized that he had to redo it and reinsert it, and by that time it was too late. So, um, medical malpractice cases in the state of New York are defended very vigorously by some of the best lawyers that I've ever come across, just brilliant minds. And this case was no different. And I have a lot of respect for the colleagues on the other side doing what they do. We all have jobs to do, and they do them well. And but it was contentious nonetheless. And so that it's like every case, maybe not every case, has a smoking gun, so to speak. This one turned out to be a nurse who came out of retirement and told us the truth about what happened that evening, and as a result, that was probably one of the reasons why we were able to get the case resolved.
It's interesting. Yeah. You said it was 5 years from start to finish in terms of the timeline.
Yeah, unfortunately in New York, the system is just overworked and overburdened, and there are way too many cases for the amount of judges, and the it's been a problem since I started practicing 20 plus years ago. It was a problem when my father was practicing 30 and 40 and 50 years ago. Um, but since COVID, it got worse. And so there are inherent um, delays in the system. And then when you have contentious litigation that requires, over a dozen depositions, um, these cases take time. And then when you have a pandemic that shuts down the courts completely for close to 2 years, that only adds into the delays. But it's a problem, and yeah, that's uh, you know, uh, 5 years. I hate to say is going to be more of the norm now, and if any of my current clients are listening and they're wondering why it's taking so long on their cases, you now have hopefully some sort of an explanation. And but rest assured, we do everything we can to move the ball down the court, and it's just there's only so much that you can do sometimes.
Right, and it's a backlog. I mean, New York is an enormous city, largest city in the country, so it makes sense that there would be, just sort of a log jam of these kinds of cases. It's not
Yeah,
shocking.
and it's it really is a problem. There's no doubt about it. I'm dealing right now with incidents, accidents, and things that occurred. I was on a call preparing for my next upcoming trial. It was 2017 was the incident. And what happens is witnesses get lost. Evidence gets harder to subpoena. Medical records, facilities close up. You can't find records. It just everything becomes a little bit more difficult. Um, and there's make no mistake about it. Doing what I do, no matter the case, even in a case like horrific as the one we're talking about, um, we have it's not an even starting field when you get in front of a jury. We are behind. We are automatically thought of as you know looking for a handout, and looking to strike it rich, and you know blaming them for no reason. And those are things that in every case we have to, knock down and find unbiased people who don't believe that and can decide a case fairly.
So in this specific case, kind of dovetailing off of that, because I assume some of these will go to trial, but this case settled, correct? So
Well, this case settled. This case was like many cases, yes, the majority of the cases settle. Um, and then the majority of the cases that settle at the end point, at
okay, that
where
was what I was.
it's the jury, they like to say, is heading down the elevator, and all of a sudden there's all sorts of money that had never been there. And there's various reasons for that. One of the potential reasons, is defense attorneys get paid by the hour. Um, Plaintiffs' attorneys, I would have made the same amount of money on that case if I settled it the 2 days later for that amount, or if it took me the 5 years it did. Um, but So this one was up for trial, and I was preparing for the trial. And as the trial day approached, um, I was asked to participate in a out of court mediation, which is a non-binding thing, where it's typically a retired judge or attorney, and they hear both sides, and typically I start all the way here, and they start here, and they try to get us here. And that's what happened here. It was a 6 hour long day of mediating and going back and forth, and we were able to come to terms. Um,
That was literally going to be my next question was about the negotiation process, how it unfolded, and whether I would assume obviously that the defendant, in this case, this hospital, would have tried to minimize or their attorneys would try to minimize compensation. How did you advocate in that moment for your client's interest?
so, I take these mediations, which is um, it, many cases get resolved at mediation these days. That was not true when I started practicing. Um, I was actually, frankly, I was fortunate because when I started practicing, within my first 6 years of practicing, I had taken like 100 verdicts, and there were more trials, and it was just how you couldn't settle the case, go try a case. It was different. Now we go to these mediations. I take these mediations extremely seriously, and I prepare intensely. Um, and what I did in that case, which I've done in other cases, is I hire um, a film crew, and we make a movie, and I play the movie at the mediation for the other side's attorneys and their insurance people to all watch, and and then I also submit a very intensive documents explaining our case, and and then when you're actually in the negotiations during the mediation, it's not always trying to get from here to here. There's other factors at play. So in this case, remember, you had the hospital, and you had the attending doctor, and you had the radiologist, and I knew that each one wanted the other to pay more than that one. So it becomes a matter of playing those arguments too. And in some circumstances, it's like me and for example, the hospital's lawyer, or sometimes we were on the same page, because I'm saying that the majority of the money needs to come from the attending doctor, because at the end of the day, the attending doctor is responsible for his patient, and that was his patient. And he's saying, oh, well, no, the hospital needed other things that they didn't have to prevent this from happening, and the radiologists read it wrong. And so it becomes a matter of apportionment too, which is what happened in this case.
Um, yeah, it's so interesting. And when it all kind of wrapped up at the end, again, obviously there's no, someone dies, it's just catastrophic, especially someone so young. But what was I guess, the total settlement? You mentioned multi millions. If it's okay to sort of say what that number was, and how did that help, this family, obviously, again, just kind of move forward?
Yeah. So, well, I can't. I can't talk about the parties because that's confidential. The number I could tell you was around $4 million. Um, but you mentioned the end, and what else nobody knows about is from the day that that case was settled at a mediation, it actually takes almost another year um, to get the family their money. And the reason why is that when somebody dies in the state of New York and there is a lawsuit and that lawsuit is settled, you need what's called a wrongful death compromise order, which has to be done in the surrogate's court. And the court has to approve the settlement. And they have to approve it. And this is all done to protect the interests of the minors. So in this case, my client's 6-year-old son. And that process of submitting wrongful death papers to be have a case compromised in the surrogate's court, which in the state of New York has even worse backups than the Supreme Court that we had already discussed, takes a tremendously long time. Where I actually work with surrogates attorneys. And in this particular case, when there's a minor, the court appoints what's called a guardian ad litem, which is actually a person who reviews all of the case and the settlement amounts to determine that it is appropriate for the infant and it's in the infant's best interests. So getting a guardian appointed and then having the judge approve the settlement, all this takes many months. But we're done, and it is obviously we cannot bring back our minor client's father. That's not something that anybody can do. But at least, money can provide some opportunities for him that will be helpful as he gets older, especially when he no longer has a father. And the money, as we speak, is sitting in a interest-bearing accounts, which only he, when he turns 18, will be able to take possession of.
That's great. That's amazing. Yeah, and you're doing incredible work, and I'm sure all of your clients appreciate you tremendously. Thank you for joining us today on Just Settled, Justin, and going over the details of this case. It really was eye-opening.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you having me on. I thank you for the very insightful questions, and yeah, I hope I provided some semblance of justice for this family on this one. So this one is one I'll take with me for a long time.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Justin. We really
Thank,
appreciate it.
thanks, Stan. Appreciate it.